Hi all, welcome back to BLL Knowledge Center. So in this session, we'll see what is EnableViewState. So as part of ASP.NET architecture, this is one of the core component inside of architecture, and this is applicable for pages and controls. So what is EnableViewState? EnableViewState is kind of a state management where we can keep or maintain the state and traverse the state between different pages. So by default, HTTP protocol is stateless, which doesn't carry any input or output and can't store any state instead of ASP.NET. That means it always loss or it always disappear the response. And we have to maintain the state if you want to maintain a value and needs to be passed to different page. So enable view state is a feature provided by ASP.NET, and we can configure this enable view state at the page level as well as control level. So view state basically applicable for server-side controls to maintain its state across HTTP request. View state for a control is enabled if all of the following conditions are met. So the enable view state property for the page is set to true, and the enable view state property for the control is set to true. Let me show you in the demonstration. So I'm just opening a page here. I just already created a forum view state demo. So where it basically having some controls inside of page. Like as usual, like I have a text box control, and I'm just removing the already configured view state here. And I have a text box by default come up with some ID value, right? And I have another control which basically submit button, right? And I have a couple of other controls like radio button list, and which basically demonstrates some kind of color setting for the text box for color. Okay, so and also I have another control label where basically displays some caption for the demo, right? So by default, this is the look you see when you drop onto the page, right? By default, you will see only these properties: run at equal to server, and the text. I think you have to mention it something, and the ID it will default add based on the control by just adding index, right? So basically, look at the text box. So this is the ID I just mentioned, txt view state, and this is a submit button, and the ID is btn submit. So by default, the view state is true for every control, every server side control. That's why, so whatever value or kind of state you are having it could be, always shown to you, even the page is post back. Let me save this. I'm just setting this as a startup page and see how it is now coming back to UI even after a post back happened to server. I'm just running this, and by default, it will show you the text box and submit button and radio button list here with the 3 or 4 options. I think here 3 options, and other thing is a label, right? So these are the radio button list: red, green, blue, and this is the button I just mentioned here, I think. So I'll go to the server side stuff and see like what other business logic is executing. If you look at the page post back here and the load of your page, right? I just mentioned if it is not a page post back, that means a very initial load. I'm going to set some no sending something value here. And for the submit button, I'm just setting view state demo text, and the back color is something, fore color is something, and the demo label for the label caption I just mentioned, this is something DDD, right? Hence it is by default showing the kind of UI is right, as like this, right? So when I say red and green or something, so each button click event, I have some logic here, right? So setting or changing my text value as hi, welcome to ViewState demo, and the color is yellow by default, and based on the radio button selection, I'm just setting back color as the relevant color code, right? So coming to the UI, so when I set this red, it is going to set red as a background, and yellow is the forecolor. And when I set blue here, green here, back color is green is configuring, blue is configuring, and this is something default value setting it here, and this is something default kind of style applying for my button. So now the case is when I click on view state demo, right? This is server side button, right? Definitely it goes to the post back. Let me keep a debugger here and try to hit this button again. It is coming to page load, right? Not here. Let me try here. View state demo. I think I just modified. Let me come back after saving. It is in edit mode. Let me run again and see like how it is happening it. So by default it fires the page load because I don't have page in it or page pre-rendered. So by default it is coming here, it executes page load, and this is not a post back, right? It is by default coming inside and settings the default settings, and it appears the page as like this. So when I give some value or clicking on red, it is coming again page load because the radio button is server side control, and it is not going inside of this logic because this is post back hit coming true, and this is coming here and setting the property values, right? Setting a value for this and for color, and I selected red, applying the red, right? Now when I click on view state button, what is happening? It is hitting to page because page is submitted. Now it is coming here. This stuff is not at all executing because it's a post back. But thing is, it is maintaining state, right? The background color and the foreground color and the text, everything is appearing, everything is retained back even in the post back. Why? Because by default the ASP.NET server controls are now coming up with enable view state. So when enable view state is now configured as true, the state of control, like no value or styles for color, back color, or font, and everything will get retained. And the same thing, same value, same style can be shown on the UI, even it is post back. So if you wanted to stop, because the view state is maintained in hidden fields. If you look at this source, like no, just pressing this F12, right, and see like how it is maintaining your source stuff. I'm just removing debugger tuck points here and see like how my request is processing, right? So coming to the UI, right, and just selecting green, right, clicking on view state demo, everything is fine. If you look at this page response here, right, going to response, so just click on this and see how it is rendering. We are not appearing here also. Okay, let me check here itself. Page, yeah, the third time it has appeared. If you look at here, the view state, whatever controls you enable view state, these are the three controls we just placed on the page. This is the text box and submit button, and this is the radio button list. So all these three controls are server side controls. So by default, all these server side controls enable view state is true, even label also, right? So this enable view state is true, hence the value is maintaining in the base64 format with hidden fields. That's why this tag is adding here and the value is keeping here, right? And if you look at clearly here, like how many controls you have, those many control hidden fields are added, right? So the view state value is being maintained and traversing between client and server via base64 format, right? No, this is something which basically bit overload or heavy load onto my page, because every time it is carrying all this stuff to server, and from the server it is again carrying the data to a client, which basically takes so much of space and bandwidth and the time taking to process response, right? So if you wanted to stop the view state traversing or making or enabling of view state, so you will have enable view state property. Let me show that. So going back to my design view state demo, and select this text box, right? For the text box, we'll see what is happening. So I'm just selecting text box and click on property window. Here you can have that enable view state is true, right? You just make this as false, right? And also view state mode, I think this is not applicable if it is false, but now here we have to view state mode, you have to select as disabled or enabled. It all depends on how you are configuring enable view state, because if enable view state is not true, right, this is not going to be work out, right? So when enable view state is false, right, the data for the text box is coming from system.web.enableViewState, UI.web controls. Let me see that. I'm just share this option and just see here in the HTML layout, these properties are added as part of tag control tag. So let me run this and see like how it is running. So I think I'll get same UI here with all the four controls, like text box, button, radio, button list, and label. But I'm selecting on this, the red color back color applied, and this is four color applied, right? This is also something. When I click on button, look at here, all the four color and back color gone. I lost it because I said this enable view state is false, right? So I think when enable view state is false, right, the control state will get lost in the post back request. So I think one of the common interview question you people might have experienced is explain the use of view state for text box. And the most popular and common answer for this question is view state will maintain the text property value of the text box of a post back for the page. But here it is not like that. Text box value is not lost, right? The text box value still I'm getting back. Only the color, four color and back color is lost in here, right? So where the data for the text box is coming from. So to explain more on that, so when enable view state is false, the data for the text box is coming from system.web.ui web controls.textbox class, right? So that is one of the several classes that implement the is post back data handler interface. So this interface is post back data handler requires the load post data method. After page installation, it is completed, but before the load event loading of view state data, it is invoked. That is load view state method is going to invoke. So and then if the control implements is post back data handler, the loading of the form data is invoked, that is load post data. So completely, if you want to disable like the view state, right? The view state mechanism for text box controls and like cannot be completely disabled in this case, right? For example, view state is useful when a text change event is handled for kind of comparing the current and previous values. It can also be used when the value that is being set other than the one related to the controls value, like for color and back color. So all controls that implement is post back data handler load event, their values remain retained even if view state is off, right? So like if you look at here, my text box enable view state is false, but I'm still getting data because this data is coming from system.web.ui.webcontrols.textbox class because is post back data handler is by default handle for that. If you want to explain me more on that, right, what I'm trying to say is, so all controls that implement is post back data. So all controls like that implements, right, is uh, post back post back data handler, right? So the control get load the value even view state is off. So load the value even view state is false, right? Here are some of the controls, not all controls. Here are some of controls, right, that implement, right, is post back data handler. So please make a note on that. Is post back data handler is not implemented for all controls. Only couple of controls it is having it, right? Especially the checkbox, right, and checkbox list, right, and drop down list, and list box, and radio button list. and lastly text box. So these controls only retain the value even if view state is false, because these controls are having is post back data handler instead of these class objects. Okay, so that means the is post back handler method is going to fetch the data back to UI, right? So this is the interface basically which requires load post data method. So after page installation is completed, but before the loading of view state, the view state related data is going to be invoked via load view state method. So if the control is implemented is post back data handler, then the view state doesn't impact on the control data, but the relevant kind of styles will get impacted. So the view state mechanism for controls and the other controls I have mentioned here cannot be completely disabled, right? So view state is useful when the text change event is handled, like know what is the previous value and current value. If you wanted to compare it, then only it is useful on these controls, right? It can also be used when the value that is being set other than the one related to the control value, for example, forecolor and back color, right? So to demonstrate that, the use of no view state, right? So I'll just demonstrate you, like going back to my page and see like how did I mention here. So here what I'm going to do is I'm just having, this is the radio button list, right? This is the label, and this is the button, and this is something. Now when I do something like false, enable view state false for this text box is still returning a value. And when I say same thing for this here, right, my button also will get the value or not? Definitely it will not get it, because whatever list I mentioned, button is not there. It will definitely not retain the value back, and it will always load the old value. I like in similar way label, I'm just making false. Now try to run this, right? Going to the code behind. So here you just try to set the button, use state demo and color green and red. When I set enable view state false, what it has to do? It has to load the previous value, right? Let me compile, right, and let me run this and see like how it is coming back the values from a view state. Because whatever list I mentioned, checkbox list, and radio button list, and drop down list, and list box, and text box, these are the controls which basically implements is post back data handler, and other controls doesn't have, right? I'm just clicking on green and blue, everything is coming. Look at here, very initially, right? Very initially when I load the page, right? This is again post backing. So when I initially browse my page, it is not a post back, right? It is coming here and it is applying all the logic which I mentioned here, like setting of button text and the back color and forecolor and the label value. When I click on red button, what is happening is these are all server controls. It is making a server hit. It is making a post back to the server. When it is coming to server, all controls are reinitializing, right? Especially the controls which are not supporting is post back data handler. All other controls are going to reinitialize and display the initial values. Clicking on red, look at here, red functionality is setting this value to text box and setting this color for color to text box, and the background is red. This stuff is fine, but looking at this and this, submit, this is the default value being captured here. This is the default value being captured here. Looking at here, the label default value is demo and button default value is submit, right? So on the post back, default values are appearing here. Why? Because this button and this label are not maintaining any state, because we disabled view state just by giving enable view state. If you want to maintain a state, you just put that enable view state true or just remove that. So when you remove that, it will by default support true, right? So apart from the controls I have mentioned here, right, these controls, other all controls are going to completely disable state of the controls, values, and styles if you set the enable view state false, right? So the view state is not only used for maintaining the state of a data instead of control. There are also many other state management that has been done for view state for controls like forecolor, back color, and so on. So if you look at this case example right now, so which is we basically setting background and foreground for a button, right? And then the label text I'm changing here in server side, all are freshly loading it in the post back event, right? Even when I click anything, it is freshly loading, hence it is reinitializing and coming up with default values. But this is remains same because as I mentioned, this is control is available, right? In the list I mentioned here, right? This is coming out, right? Even the radio button list also I mentioned it. Whatever option I'm selecting is coming up with the selected option, even if it is in the post back request, because it is maintaining a state. These two controls are having these post back data handler, hence it is coming up with the latest data, but not these two controls, because these two controls are not part of this list, and these controls are not having these post back data handler. Is post back data control handler only having for these controls. So these controls we won't completely disable view state. So apart from forecolor, back color, and other states of the control properties, and values will always retain, but other controls won't retain the data in the postback if it is false. Okay, coming to this page again, post view state can be disabled in via two areas. One is at the page level. In the page level you can enable or disable view state, or you can do it control level. If you do here, what is happening is it is going to apply for all controls. If the control is having still, it is going to override this particular. So this is the prime aspect. This is the super. This is the prime, and this is the superior kind of configuration. It's always override the page level stuff. Okay, so this is something the demonstration I just would like to explain about the enabling of view state in .NET, ASP.NET, how it is managing. And also, if you look at here, we have a view state, right? When I keep this value and assigning some value here, and I'll get this value right in the post back request. Let me see that when I open that, and when I try to run that. So with Git, I'm basically having BRR is a string is by default assigning it, and I'm just assigning this value here. So in this case, all everything is gone. Now coming here, let me see what is happening. The post back, right? I'm clicking on that, and when I read through this value, right, I'm getting BRR. That means if you wanted to keep values being maintained even in postback, you need to use a view state of some key and assign the values to here. So in this case, view state of a button text is so and so, view state of button text forecolor is red, button text background is green, a label text is something, and then you assign all those stuff here back to your controls here. Got my point? So using view state, right? You need to keep all the values in the post back, and when in the initial stage when you assign the values, and then the post back you read through a view state so that you will have same state back, even if it is enabled view state is false. Okay, so what I'm trying to tell about is, so by default it is supporting, I mean enabling view state, and as a developer, please make and be cautious about making enabling of view state, because it is overburden on your performance, right? So you need to switch off that view state and try to enable only the required controls, or use this view state object at server side if you want to get retain back the values to UI. Okay, so this is something how it is looks like and working on it. Okay, thanks for listening to this video, and I hope you understand the differences of making true of view state and disabling of view state, especially these controls, right? And the rest of other controls won't know, so get or retain the value, so they will completely disable it the state if you set the enable view state false. But these controls, even if you set enable view state is false, the value will get retained back, because these controls are having an implementation of east post back data handler interface, which by default implements load view state data. Okay, thanks for listening to this video and please subscribe the channel for more videos. Thank you.